Our next presentation, it's our lunchtime presentation. It's on the 2020 Mississippi Infrastructure Report Card. And today we have Jacob Forrester, who was the chair of the report card, and Christy Prouty from ASCE that are going to be speaking about this project. Jacob and Christy?
Hey, good afternoon, Jennifer. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Awesome. First and foremost, I hope that you guys are enjoying your lunch right now. This is somewhat of a laid-back presentation, and hopefully it'll be a little bit of a break from some of the highly technical presentations that have been given from the other great engineers and presenters this morning so far. At any rate, welcome and thank you for joining us today for the 2020 report card for Mississippi Infrastructure presentation. My name is Jacob Forrester, and I'm the advocacy captain of the Mississippi section of American Society of Civil Engineers. And I most recently have been serving as the report card chair for the 2020 report card release. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, but I'd like to especially thank the people, the volunteers that contributed to everything that is this report card and what's been released. And I see several of you online today. You guys made this, not me. You guys have everything to be proud about this. And, there's no way that we could have pulled this together without the countless hours that you all spent on this. So thank you so much for that. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that on the front end of this. We're living in very unprecedented times here in Mississippi and across the country with the COVID-19 pandemic. And add to that the devastating tornadoes from the spring that we had and the current hurricanes that we seemingly deal with each week. Today's subject is certainly applicable and valid at this time. As you all know, ASCE holds paramount with public health, safety, and welfare. And this consideration was utilized and held in front of us as we approach working on this report card. We know the quality of our infrastructure is an issue that affects all of us on a day-to-day basis as Mississippians. And it's important that we discuss and go ahead and take up these topics during these times. We need clean water to wash our hands and for drinking. We still need to be able to turn the lights on and drive to the grocery store over our roads and bridges. We also know that the infrastructure fuels the economy by enabling goods to travel from our ports to our grocery store shelves, through rails and roads and across our bridges. We'll talk a little later, but you can't address our state's infrastructure without addressing the threats of and damage caused by the natural disasters that we see fairly often in the state. That includes floods, tornadoes, all of the above. When it comes time to rebuild after those major events, we must be strategic by incorporating consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards, including ASCE standards. We can't afford to rebuild in the same way with these increasing number of storms and the ever-changing environment. Just a brief background about Mississippi section of ASCE, so I can throw in a shameless plug here before I turn it over to Christy. The Mississippi section is the local organization of ASCE National. It's the oldest and largest engineering society in the nation. I guess you guys all know that. I'm probably not telling you much there, but our section was founded in 1969 and has nearly 1,000 members from all disciplines and sectors of civil engineering. We've got a great turnout today, and I appreciate you all being here. As stewards of our infrastructure, civil engineers are responsible for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of our vital public works. With that responsibility comes the obligation to periodically assess the state of our infrastructure, and that's part of what we're talking about here today. Theoretically, we're supposed to, work on this report card about every 4 years. However, I think that it's been 8 years since the last update, so we may have skipped 2016, but I think the last update was in 2012. But we are going to aim to do this again in 2024. So with that, I think that now is a good time to bring in, well, let me mention one other thing. I didn't mention about the help that our universities, the professors and students provided, and I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that right now. So thank you to all of the students who participated in helping to gather information and helping to, to use that data as a foundation for this infrastructure report card. I'd like to introduce Christy Prouty at this time, who is online with us today. She's an engineer from Mississippi, and she works with ASCE in Washington, D.C. Christy, before we begin, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll come back to you toward the end of the presentation about how we can help to support efforts and become better stewards of our profession. Christy? Are you there?
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So thanks, Jacob. I appreciate it. Like you mentioned, my name's Christy Prouty, Senior Manager of Infrastructure Initiatives in DC with ASCE. And our goal here, not only to kind of, beat the drum and encourage folks to continue to see the Mississippi Report Card, which was newly released, to see it as a tool, is to kind of talk to y'all a little bit about what ASCE does, not only at the state level, but then also at the federal level as far as government relations and advocacy. So I work on behalf of ASCE's government relations staff, and we work to support sections and branches as y'all are influencing public policy. At the state level in particular, we work with leadership, advocacy captains, and we're trying to carry forward ASCE's priorities at state capitals around the country. On the federal level, we actually employ 3 full-time lobbyists and a team up here. So they are working with congressional offices, they're working with advocacy captains and key contacts around the country. So going to offices for every state. And we're doing that because civil engineers, all of us, I'm actually an environmental engineer by trade, but y'all are like civil engineering cousins. But us as engineers, our profession is one that's really very well respected on Capitol Hill and certainly in state capitals. So what our team does is, and kind of what it's, I would say, quote unquote, most famous for, is the infrastructure report card. So we have one that's coming out in 2021. This is the national report card. And like Jacob mentioned, state report cards do try to come out on a 4-year kind of rhythm, but the national report card definitely does every 4 years, just right after an election. And policymakers use it as a tool. They look to civil engineers, they look to this information for the on-the-ground expertise and for the technical knowledge that they need as they're making policy decisions. So, we certainly lobby. We can and do lobby. That's a myth that maybe nonprofits are kind of a misconception that we can't. We do. But what we don't do is endorse specific candidates or anything like that. And those are some of the things that we can get into the weeds about later. But my hope was really just to remind y'all that ASCE as a national, in our office here in DC and in Reston, we are linked closely with our state partners, and specifically through government relations, specifically through the report card process, the state and national report card process. So yeah, looking forward to the presentation, and it's been a joy to work with both Jennifer and Jacob.
All right, now that our plug for ASCE is out of the way, let's get to it. So we utilized a simple A-to-F school report format. The 2020 report card provides a comprehensive assessment of current infrastructure conditions and needs. So just like you see in grade school, A, B, C, D, we left out the E because there's not an E and we had an F if there's something that's that poor. So as you can kind of see from the screen there, each of those grades are what those are the definitions for the grades. So we don't I've always heard it talked about, you know, in school, you want to have an A, you want to have an A. My parents wanted me to have A's, and I was definitely not a straight A student, but what we're shooting for here is a B to a C. And so I think that that generally is the intent of a good expense of public dollars, because much of the work that we do is tied to public dollars. And so I think that attaining an A personally, and maybe the National Association would agree with me here, I think attaining an A is an excessive use of spending those dollars. It becomes unnecessary at that point to try to meet that A. But if we can maintain a B to a C, that's generally where we want to be. All right, so let's talk about Mississippi's grade. The cumulative grade for the 2020 report card for Mississippi's infrastructure is a B+. You know, that as a state that prides itself for the hospitality we showed, this D+ is not especially welcoming, not especially something that I'm proud of, but it means that the infrastructure is in poor condition and is at risk. Now, I don't want to be doom and gloom here, because we're right in the middle of what all of the other states are experiencing too. And what that is it's just the time for reinvestment. You know, we've been talking about this for several years, and I think that you guys as engineers in the industry would agree with that. But it means that we're not preparing our state for economic growth that we could be experiencing. You know, Mississippi has a lot to offer, and you know, I think that upping that grade, the infrastructure grade, could help us be more competitive and in line with the economic growth that we could experience. The 2020 report card for Mississippi's infrastructure covers 12 categories. Each category is assessed by a team of civil engineers who assign the grades according to the following 8 criteria there: capacity, condition, funding, future need, O&M, public safety, resilience, and innovation. And for more, you guys can go ahead and read that slide. I'll take just a second here. Now that everybody that is speed reading has finished consuming that, let's go to the first topic. First, this report shows that when there is investment in Mississippi's infrastructure, there are more jobs, which means more economic growth. So let's talk about Mississippi's ports, for instance. The ports are critical to the state's economy and well-being. Our Department of Transportation noted that Mississippi ports support 125,000 jobs and nearly $5.4 billion in income. They generate nearly $17 billion in economic stimulus annually. And so you guys can see there that the ports grade was a B-. Not too bad, that's a good start. The Mississippi River, the largest river system in the U.S., is critical to commerce, and this is where we get into inland waterways. Mississippi's inland waterways, which account for millions of tons of agricultural goods transported through the state, have, however, taken a hit from recent flooding events threatening future economic use. As you can see, the inland waterways received a D. So we've got some work to do there to get it up to a C or even a B, B-. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimated that an additional $100 billion is needed to fully clear the flood-deposited sediment from the state's inland waterways in order to return canals to their original depth and width. Up next is our airports. Our airports employ over 20,000 people with a total payroll of $721 million and total economic output of $2.5 billion. You know, concerningly, we experienced a 34% decline in passengers from 2007 to 2017, which I expect has taken an even larger impact with COVID-19. And of course, this has impacted our amount of funding for aviation infrastructure the state receives from passengers in the federal government. You know, our aviation, however, is at a C. It received a grade of C, which is, you know, it's getting on that borderline of being acceptable that I mentioned earlier. All right. Secondly, much of Mississippi's infrastructure is aging and beyond its useful life. This impacts the quality of life and decreases the economic efficiency for Mississippi residents. So let's talk about bridges a little bit. More than 400 timber pile bridges in Mississippi have been closed to the public since 2018. And the Federal Highway Administration determined these structures have been insufficiently inspected and pose a risk to the traveling public. I think many of you probably remember that. I think many of you probably were involved in that in some tangential way. You may recall that these bridge closures, they affected emergency vehicles and school district routes, and their commutes became longer for some of the Mississippians trying to get to work because they have to drive on the dirt roads and through fields to get around the bridge. There were literally some stories where individuals had to drive through, a cotton field or a cornfield to get to work. That increases the risk of expensive car maintenance and repairs, and so you experience that cost through one way or another of deteriorating infrastructure. The bridges received a D-, and let's go on into a little bit more information about them. A total of 3,127 of Mississippi bridges are weight restricted. Some are posted for a 4-ton load, approximately the average weight of a pickup truck. Spurred by bridge closures and to address safety concerns, the Mississippi legislature convened a special session in August 2018 and voted to provide approximately $100 million annually for bridge maintenance and rehabilitation, as well as an additional $250 million in bonds. That's a start. That's a good start. That additional funding is helpful, but it doesn't quite come close to addressing the estimated $1.6 billion funding gap or reversing the years of underinvestment in bridges in Mississippi. So we're talking about a lot of dollars here, and that's a D-, and the bridges are, the vital lifelines of getting to and from where we need to be every day. All right, we'll go on into drinking water now. Drinking water systems are also aging, and they're losing as much as 30 to 50% of their treated water to leaks and breaks. This waste is paid for by all of us because we fund the cost of treating the water that we then don't receive in our taps. In 2015, the United States EPA estimated that Mississippi needs $4.8 billion over the next 20 years to fund safe drinking water infrastructure for Mississippi, for people of Mississippi, rather. Here in Starkville, just for example, since I have direct information with us, we are actually funding about $1.5 million of additional capital investment annually through rates in lieu of long-term bonds, and we still utilize long-term financing options, but we've making a concerted decision to begin replacing our infrastructure actively and begin reinvesting in that infrastructure each year. So we see that that's beginning to benefit. We have an old neighborhood that we started in about a year and a half ago, and we finished up that project, and fortunately we don't see, thank goodness we don't see, but we don't see the annual maintenance that we had. So that's saving us some dollars on the O&M side. All right, let's go into roads now. Without a doubt, our roads need help. It's a D-. Roadway projects are largely paid for with an 18.4 cents per gallon tax on gasoline, which hasn't been raised for over 30 years. I know that you guys have been privy to that information. That's been a major talking point the past 4 to 5 years, I think, in Mississippi. So inflation and other factors have decreased the spending power of the state's gas tax, which has led to an inability to pay for maintenance and rehabilitation projects around the state. In 2018, nearly 40% of major urban road miles in the state were in poor condition. That's double the national rate. And 25% of the rural road network was also in poor condition. To put this into tangible terms, the average motorist spends about $820 in additional vehicle repairs and operating costs because Mississippi roadways are in such poor condition. Also, of major concern is the state's fatality rate in 2018, which was one of the highest in the nation and 40% greater than the national average. So this is real life experience that we're having here. This is not something that can't be touched, can't be felt. This is what we're experiencing. Third, and let's move on into the next section. Third, Mississippi is a water-rich state that experiences spring floods, heavy summer rains, and seasonal hurricanes. For the lack of routine maintenance and funding for dams and levees, it poses a threat to nearby communities and businesses. Now, I guess we've seen that in the past 3 years where we have the 3 wettest years on record. Mississippi is home to over 900 miles of concrete and earthen levees that protect hundreds of thousands of people and $22 billion in property. None of the Army Corps of Engineers levees are in acceptable condition, and little to no information is publicly available on the condition of non-Army Corps levees. That should be concerning in and of itself. The majority of dams in Mississippi are privately owned, and the responsibility for maintaining and repairing these dams falls on the owners. So the levees received B. Let's see what the dams received. They also received a B. 130 of Mississippi's high hazard potential dams need repair. However, most Mississippi dams are owned by private entities that do not have the same financial resources as federal and state-owned dams. All right, and finally, where the private sector has made investments in the energy grid and ports of the plate system like ports and rails, results can be seen. So let's end with this positive note here. The capacity of the state's privately owned energy infrastructure is remotely monitored and controlled, which meets the service and public safety needs of our users. It's a good thing. Additionally, the federal corporate agency, the Tennessee Valley Authority, also does a great job in providing the electrical needs of more than 400,000 rural households and business customers in Mississippi. Energy infrastructure in Mississippi is continuously being developed to meet the state's demands. The state itself is working diligently in expanding this energy capacity through energy conservation and efficiency. Again, this is something that I have firsthand knowledge of here at Starkville Utilities, and we are reinvesting in our energy infrastructure on a daily basis as a distributor. We are actually investing in about a $10 million substation currently. So we're nearing the completion of that, which will finish up toward the end of the year, which will provide us a second point of supply from TVA that helps to make our reliability even greater. So ports and rails, moving forward, are pulling their weight as evidenced in their grades, which were the 2 highest in the report. The 3 largest Mississippi ports are investing in their infrastructure, although none are capable of receiving larger post-Panamic ships. These ships are becoming increasingly common, and if Mississippi wishes to capture the market they represent, public discussion should and must take place to consider increasing the dredging depths that would accommodate larger vessels. Due to rebuilding efforts and new investments following Hurricane Katrina, all 3 ports are in good condition. They have enough capacity to meet their current needs. The railway system provides over a quarter of the freight services in Mississippi. Rail lines typically are in decent condition, but they are subject to periodic inspections for infrastructure quality. They also have sufficient capacity to support a higher level of train operations. Within the past 10 years, the total railroad-related incidents in Mississippi have been reduced by half, but continuous maintenance and improvement of safety at grade crossings remains a vital topic. The limited number of grade crossings with active warning devices is a source of avoidable accidents. Mississippi's rail system is fairly resilient, particularly to the recent floods as they were built higher than the rising waters that we see in the past few years. All right, now most of these grades are not good. However, over the last 15 years, our infrastructure systems have faced numerous and unprecedented challenges. Those come in the forms of tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, and floods. Every time, however, that Mississippians have faced these types of challenges, we've also pulled ourselves up by the proverbial bootstraps, and we've gotten to work. We think it, we grow it, and we invest in it. And that's the Mississippi way, and it's time that we invest in Mississippi's infrastructure now. You know, if we are ready to improve our grades and infrastructure, ASCE has some suggestions on how we can begin raising those grades. First, we need to ensure that infrastructure investment is strategically focused on efforts that maximize good-paying jobs, that promotes the state's economic competitiveness, and it enhances the usability so that all Mississippians continue to be able to access it and proud to call our state home. Second, the design, operation, maintenance, and expansion of infrastructure in accordance with federal leadership. You know, it must be done for using consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards that reduce the potential loss of jobs, economic opportunity, and critical natural resources. You guys can see there that under President Trump's administration, FEMA and other federal agencies have begun to pivot toward mitigation measures to ensure better use of tax dollars, which is a strategy Mississippi should also employ. Third, let's develop and disseminate a comprehensive education campaign on the true costs and savings associated with investment in critical infrastructure and real estate through publicly accessible channels and platforms, such as MPB and social media forums. You guys see the impact every day that social media forums have. I think utilizing those can help to expand our message and make more contact. Fourth, let's establish a grant program for the 21st century technical career training in drinking water and wastewater sectors that retains Mississippi's talents and mainstreams tools for data-driven decision-making, such as asset management, life cycle cost analysis, and affordable rate structure. You know, I know that there are some forms of financing that already take into account life cycle cost analysis, but that should be something that we should be doing on every engineering project, in my opinion. You know, another thing that having been a manager at a public utility, I see it every day that it is extremely difficult to find talent in Mississippi and keep them here. Not only just from a standpoint of the training that those individuals receive, but also from a cost. You know, we're starting to see water treatment operators make between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, and we've got to be competitive in that area. All right, finally, Mississippi's highways and scenic back roads are the state's critical arteries to our homes, businesses, and outdoor recreation. So our roadway user rates must contribute a fair share to aid in the maintenance and fill the gap that isn't covered by state spending. You know, I know that there's many different school of thoughts, and if you bring up that dirty four-letter word that's called tax, people tend to get a little uncomfortable, but we need to find a way where this can be a user cost, where the users that are utilizing the roadway, damaging it the most, pay their fair share. So that's at least my opinion anyhow. I'll hand it back over to Christy at this point before we close out for some information about where we go from here. Christy?
Okay, thanks, Jacob. Yep, so now what? My goal is to encourage y'all to contextualize this Mississippi report card and the solutions that y'all's group has developed, to contextualize that at the state and federal legislative spaces. So whether that's there in Jackson, or if it's up here in DC, we would love for y'all to get more engaged and to just use this tool to bring forth some of these solutions. So how do we do that? Next slide, please, ma'am. It's through some strategic stakeholder outreach. So this is nothing more than what we already all know how to do. It's leveraging our existing kind of natural inroads that we have through our personal and professional connections. And this is folks we might know from, you know, just our social networks, or through work in the mayor's office, on legislative committees, folks who might work with extension offices and have some educational outreach. You might go to church or play golf or, be sitting out at a ball field with somebody from city council, conservation groups, Chamber of Commerce. These are ways that folks from the ASCE Mississippi section can be thinking about how can I leverage and amplify some of the solutions that we've developed through the Mississippi Report Card in our home state. Okay, next slide. And you can do this informally, certainly, but we are here. ASCE is here to work with sections and branches. Y'all lead the effort, and we certainly rely on y'all, but there are resources from society staff, whether that's touching base with us to encourage and give y'all some information about pre-filing deadlines if you really want to sort of set some of the agenda for the upcoming legislative session. If y'all want to do government relations university or public relations university, these are things where you have access through ASCE at the national section to be able to be trained and just have a little bit more information about this. Okie doke, next. So one of the other things here is just showing how a couple of other states and other folks have seen success through their advocacy. So I'll touch on these quickly because I know that we do want to at least open things up for questions or for y'all to finish your lunch hour a little bit early. So to even understand how we prioritize success, we have to determine what are the key issues around the country. And it's a very diverse country, and ASCE, even in its members, are diverse. So we send out surveys and we gather information, and each year these kind of top priorities tend to shuffle. But for 2020, they were continuing education and licensing. You'll see natural hazard impact mitigation. That has been creeping up the scale in recent years. STEM education and support, that's near and dear to my heart, having just transitioned out of academia and more into the policy world. The state support for civil engineering, higher education, codes and standards, sustainability, transportation. So these are areas where we kind of set our advocacy agenda at the national level, but we're also doing it at the state level as well. Next slide. And then, as Jacob mentioned, so Mississippi hasn't raised our gas tax. I'll have to go back and look. I want to say it was maybe 91 or even before then. So it's one of the last states. 87. Okay, very good. Well, that was a lovely year, I'm sure. But so it hasn't raised the gas tax since then. But what we are actually doing is working with members around the country to either get things on ballots, on state ballots for votes, or to knock things off of ballots that are not beneficial for engineers or that certainly deter infrastructure investment. And those are things we can certainly be doing with Mississippi. We have folks here who keep their eye on legislation at the state level and certainly work with our representatives and senators at the congressional level to move the previously mentioned agendas forward. So gas tax is just one of those things that we've seen as a success. Okay, back over to you, Jacob.
All right, thanks, Christy. So I don't know if everybody caught the little caveat where Christy said, I'm sure 1987 was a lovely year or not, but that tickles me a little bit. And the reason that it tickles me some is that, up in DC, I don't know how much you guys have been involved directly with local, state, or federal politicians, but I would encourage you guys to get involved on those levels because there's a couple of things that really get politicians' attention. One of those is, of course, votes. But how do you convey the needs? And one way to do that is through grassroots efforts. The other way to do that is by having about $150 million in your pocket. So I don't have that, unfortunately, so I utilize the grassroots effort strategy, and for about the last 5 years, I've gone up to DC to ASCE's fly-in annually, this year accepted. But we fly in and we have meetings with our lawmakers, and we discuss some of these critical components about infrastructure investment with them. And I know that a lot of people like to take the notion that, you know, my voice doesn't matter to one person. It doesn't matter. I don't have time to fool with this. Politicians are politicians. But I would encourage you guys that we have actually seen meaningful progress in infrastructure policy as we have been going to these fly-ins, as we reach out, as we email our elected representatives. They do pay attention to that. I want to be sure that everybody understands that. They absolutely pay attention to our voice, especially as we are the professionals in our field. You know, a lot of people, and understandably so, a lot of them engineers work for the civil service, and by law they're not allowed to interact with advocacy. However, if you're in private practice or you're not a civil servant, then you are able to legally. And, you know, I would encourage you guys, just as doctors are the recognized profession or professional on their profession, you don't go to a mechanic to get a doctor's diagnosis when you're looking for a medical diagnosis. In the same way, people must rely on us as civil engineers to provide that diagnosis of the impact to infrastructure. So at any rate, these are some of the resources that you guys can utilize to get involved. I hope that if you have interest in getting involved, you'll reach out to me or Christy directly, or Jennifer, even in that matter directly, or even become a advocacy participant. You can do that by becoming a key contact with ASCE National. So here's a few more ways that you can get involved. You can take action. You know, we can help you guys host and set up and host rather a state legislative day. We can all get together, and maybe after COVID-19, which I'm sure we're all ready to be past, maybe we can all get together in Jackson next year and make our voices heard. There's a plethora of ways to get involved, and I hope that you guys begin to think about that as you see the grades that we have reflected on our report card. Go ahead to the next slide, Jennifer. All right. So before we close and before we start taking questions, I'd like to again thank you all for being here today. I know that you could have skipped out on the lunch hour. I hope you're enjoying your lunch if you're eating there in your office. But you know, your deep understanding of the impact infrastructure has on all of our lives here in Mississippi is critical. And I want to reinforce how important it is for your voice to be heard. I'd like to close by saying that in order to continuously improve our state's economy and create good paying jobs, we must work on the solutions that we've identified here today. Our infrastructure has helped us meet the challenges we've faced, and you know, now is time to help our infrastructure systems. You know, infrastructure remains and must remain a priority so that we all can continue to call the great state of Mississippi our home, and we can be proud of calling it our home. And we can show new visitors, new industries alike that Mississippi is the place that you want to be. You know, we work hard to build and maintain our system for public's health, safety, and welfare, and we ask that our policymakers review the 2020 report card. If you guys know a mayor, a state legislator, or a federal legislature, I would encourage you to get this message in front of them. All right. Once again, thanks to the committee who helped so much with all those volunteer hours in creating the report card this year. We'd also like to, you know, just thank Christy for being here today, joining us from DC, and appreciate y'all paying attention to the release of the report card. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email us or call us at that number there that's shown. or at that email. And right now, all hush, and y'all can start your questions.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions. And there was a little a discussion about gas tax, making sure that electric vehicles are paying to use the roads as well, moving past a gas tax for funding. And Jill has a question. She said, Jacob, there's been some talk about FEMA helping with funds for owners of high hazard dams in the state. Funds for engineering were available in some states last year, but have you heard of anything about funds for renovations to bring dams into compliance?
That's a good question, Jill, and I appreciate you submitting that to us. I have not paid close attention to that as of late. However, I'll speak from my personal experience. When I was at Mississippi State University, I know that we had a high hazard dam there. Y'all are probably all wondering where that was. It's over on the golf course. And if you haven't played golf here in Starkville, please come spend your money in Starkville and play golf. But at any rate, or Oxford, since we're supposed to be hosting Oxford this year. But at any rate, Jill, I know that when they become a certain level of emergency, at least my recollection is that MDEQ played a part in that and helped us to identify some funds to remediate that dam. And so I think a good starting point would be Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality. That's MDEQ, in case anybody's not familiar with that. I do believe that each year they have a limited amount of funds that may be able to help in dam remediation, repair, and improvement. If anybody knows anything more than that, please feel free to pipe in. I guess not. But I think that's right, Jill. So if I'm wrong, then and you find out differently, you have my permission to call me and fuss at me.
And I do want to point out that part of how federal monies are appropriated is through the census. So please make sure you fill that out. I think Mississippi is sitting at 58% complete right now. That means 58% of Mississippians have filled out the census. 10 years ago, it was 61%. So for every person that doesn't fill out the census in the state of Mississippi, but fills it out in a different state, somebody fills it out in a different state, we have the potential to lose federal funding. And it also impacts our representation on the federal level. So just a quick plug for the census. If you haven't done it, make sure you do it. And please tell all your family and friends to do it as well. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
I guess, Jennifer, while we're here, let's see, Dr. Howard, I don't know if everybody knows Dr. Howard or not, but he had kind of sent some information about gas tax and paving prices. And I think what this chart generally shows is that paving prices have increased year over year, and the fact that that those have increased, but the funding mechanism has remained unchanged for 30 plus years. I think if I'm reading this right, Dr. Howard, it looks like it's just basically that we are greatly outpacing the cost and underpacing the ability to be able to pave roadways. I think that's the way to sum this up. So if anybody wants that information, we'll be happy to share that after the presentation if you want to see this chart. This is a great chart. Thanks, Dr. Howard, for providing that.
Jacob, this is Christy Prouty again. Just not to harp on the gas tax, because I don't want y'all to think certainly that is what the whole Mississippi report card is about. It's a great document, and it's definitely kind of, like I mentioned, one of the tools in the toolbox, and not every state uses it. But one thing I heard recently on a seminar was that if you remember in 1987, a movie ticket, somebody had compared it to that. A movie ticket was about I think $4. And now, well, I guess it's kind of a bad comparison in times of COVID, but before COVID, when we would go to the movies, it'd be anywhere $13 to, $15. And so you're not taking your $4 to the movie ticket or, to the movie counter anymore to buy a ticket. And so that kind of gives you an idea of scaling that tax with inflation, what that would look like. So anyway, just a little bit more 2 cents for you.
Dr. Howard, to your comment, Jacob said correct. Gas tax is at 37.19 cents, while asphalt binder prices, the main individual ingredient cost to pave, has roughly tripled since the Mississippi gas tax was last increased.
Okay. All right.
Well, if nobody has any more questions or comments, we're going to end this session. I do want to point out that the people on this slide are part of our report card committee, but as Jacob mentioned at the beginning, this is not everybody on the report card committee. These are our chairs. There were many, many dozens of other people who helped with this report card. And so if you were on the front lines or if you were back behind collecting data, writing things, thank you all so much for helping get this out. And we are really proud that we were able to get it out in 2020, even though the release happened basically 2 weeks after COVID started. And so we didn't get to release it in the way that we wanted to, but we're hoping to have an event at the Capitol when we are able to all get together again.
Perfect. Thanks so much for letting me talk with you guys today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.